Hello everyone, this is Angela, and welcome to my channel, Angie the ENTJ. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and click on the notifications bell so that you'll know whenever I upload any new content. And you all, let me apologize in advance for my voice quality. I'm getting better, but I'm still dealing with allergy situations, so sometimes I may sound hoarse. I don't mean it. I'm just dealing with it. So, okay, let me get into it. So, in the last video, I cover what actually sparked the natural hair movement and how it occurred when a lot of black women from very diverse backgrounds in an AOL chat room, when we all realized that we were, oh my gosh, we were living in the second rendition of the Tignon laws. And if you don't know what I'm speaking of, please go back to part 1 and I'll go into detail on the Tignon laws. So at that time, we also began to turn thoughts into action, and within a matter of months, we had Pantene shampoo and conditioner specifically formulated for black hair on the shelves of stores throughout the nation. In addition to that, we created the demand for products that were manufactured by black-owned companies for the sake of creating a circular economy. I forgot to tell you that the reason why the Pantene bottle was brown in the last video and a darker brown was because the trend back in the day to advertise black products that were produced by major corporations was to put it into black packaging, or if it were for women, to place it into pink packaging. So we wanted something that was for us, but not using the same old lame styles of marketing that were in vogue back then. And we also wanted something that was uniquely our own. That's why the shampoo and conditioner bottles were an unambiguous brown, similar to most of our collective skin tone. I also forgot to mention that our goal was to reclaim our time and to center our lives on ourselves and not our hair. So from an economic standpoint, as well as other considerations such as time, lifestyle, we wanted the average black woman who was often a low-income earner and a single mother to be able to afford to style her hair along with her daughters if she had daughters, and for it not to be an Olympic effort or to take days of her time in order to do so. This is part of the reason for the recipes that many people often refer to that could be used. They could be made using ingredients from a kitchen. Part of the reason why was in consideration of the average black woman back then. So if she did not have cash, she could not afford to go to a beauty supply store. She could buy products using her food stamps in the grocery store that she could use as a good substitute for her hair and for the hair care of her daughters. Okay? And this AOL chat group was diverse, honey. And there was a significant minority of Caribbean, African, South American, and other black people from those places from throughout the diaspora who mostly lived in the U.S. They were in the group, okay? In particular, there was a lady, she was Afro-Latina. I want to say that she was either Puerto Rican or Dominican. She is the one who gave us all the idea of using coconut oil as one of the ways to moisturize hair, because that's something that, you know, her people routinely did back on the island. And she is part of the reason why it became a trend that so many black women were using coconut oil back then as a moisturizer for the skin, for the hair. And back then you could get like a huge container of like Luana coconut oil from Walmart. I'm talking about that thing was big and it could last for months, and it was only like $5 or something like that. And it was a food item. So the average black woman, even if all she had were food stamps, you know, she could buy it. So I just wanted to put that honorable mention out there for the Afro-Latinas, as well as the other black women who were a part of this group who were not African American, but they were definitely representing in that chat. So I wanted to make sure I put that out there. So on that note, now let me take you back to what the mid to late 90s looked like for a moment. Many of us may actually take for granted right now how easy it is to access the internet. Even if you do not have a computer, you more than likely have a smartphone with Wi Fi where you can FaceTime, you can WhatsApp, and you can have Zoom meetings right from the palm of your hand, right? So, the natural hair movement began during a time before Wi Fi was a thing. And this was when Napster was a new thing. And owning a gateway computer was, I mean, that was like the status symbol back then. That was up there with the iPhone in its time, you know. And this was the mid to, late 90s. Sprint PCS was a thing. You see, during the time of AOL's popularity back then, most Americans did not own a computer in their home. The numbers were growing, but it just was not the majority. Me personally, back then, I had saved up my money and made it a point to have one when I had moved into my first apartment all of those years ago. And then another thing, too, were like the prevailing attitudes of the average American back then. Um, Most Americans at that time saw AOL was just like another useless bill to pay. And part of the reason why is because the modem had to be plugged into a landline phone jack. So it felt like to the average American starting out back then that they were paying for the phone bill twice. That wasn't true. And we all know better now, but that was some of the mentality that surrounded the technology, which was new at that point in time. So, why am I saying this? Because this meant that if we were to pause the timeline of history, and if we were to take a snapshot at that point in time, only a few Americans had a computer in their home, let alone AOL when compared to the rest of the population. And this was especially true for Black people. Not only this, it meant that you also had to have some time dedicated to sit down at a computer and to type into a chat room. This is important to know because it reveals that the majority of the women in this movement initially had to have some level of disposable income in order to be present in that forum. Although the group was very diverse, this could explain how our common baseline was very progressive, very future oriented. We were like, yeah, we can do this, we got this, and how there was little resistance towards our initiatives in the beginning. We also had a sizable number of educated professionals who participated by giving their expertise in their spare time. And when I say that they participated, I'm really not giving them justice. What you need to understand is that these professional women, what they were giving us for free, they literally could have charged hundreds of dollars for. But they were so gracious because they believed so much in what was happening at that time. So in their spare time, they contributed. And we're talking about people like attorneys, doctors, chemists, business owners, accountants. Me, at that point in time, I was working as a computer technician. We had Black women that worked as consultants in major corporations, women who worked in mental health. They worked as real estate agents, insurance agents, bank managers. I mean, you go down the list, teachers. So many professionals checked into that chat as a part of the movement, where typically from about 7 to 8 p.m. to midnight, a lot of us will be in the chat room talking about everything from hair, the family life, especially with children, to our dietary choices, dating, relationships. You know, people were discussing, questioning the spirituality and the religion. I mean, and also the fashion. I mean, it was endless. This is how some of the hair recipes that the natural hair movement became known for were shared. And you know what? We were there for one another. It was so wonderful because, and it was necessary because it was tough in the late 90s and the early 2000s to walk around with natural hair, especially if it was type 4 hair. Because what was happening is that we were literally breaking centuries of precedent. Because the normal thing was the more kinkier your hair is, something needs to be done with it. Like, it's not right. It needs to be straightened. So we were breaking that. And so we inspired one another. We supported and validated each other. And we needed that because we were facing some heavy situations. Women were getting shunned by their families. I remember one lady said that her family members, they had a family reunion. They kind of like wouldn't talk to her, wouldn't engage her in conversations, like maligned her, sidelined her, just because she wore her hair natural. They were being shunned by especially their churches. And that was surprising because one would have thought that the churches back then would have been on board immediately, because after all, this was a situation of, this is how our hair grows out of our head. God created us like this and created our hair too. But no, no. And I'm not saying all churches did this, nor am I saying all families did this. Thankfully, I wasn't shunned or anything like that. But it was a thing for a lot of women. They were shunned by their churches. And, oh my gosh, they were losing their partners. They were losing their boyfriends. They were losing their husbands. This was definitely happening to 4C women, for sure. However, surprisingly, to those of us who have, I'm a caramel complexion, and, for those of us who are darker complexions, and obviously have kinky, coily hair, man, I got the 4C hair, for real, I break brushes, type of 4C hair. It was happening to us, but it was surprisingly happening to the so-called preferred and privileged and light-skinned black women back then too. There goes that nuance. So one woman who was a caramel complexion, the brown that could stick around, I remember that her husband left her and their two small children, all because she did the big chop. And guess what? She did it without his permission. Can you imagine? Child. And she went natural and refused to wear a wig, wear a weave, or braids. He just wouldn't accept her as she is. You see, and he just left her, just up and left her like that. She was, oh my God, it was bad. Some people got together and helped her when, with little things here and there. So we were the ones, by the way, that came up with the terms. Let me turn off my phone because it keeps going off. Hold on, y'all. Okay, I got it on vibrate. So we were the ones that came up with that jargon, the big chop, the TWA, meaning the teeny weeny afro, permy, creamy crack, and so forth. And no, like I said, it was our jargon that we used in the chat. It was never intended to be weaponized, but we were all chatting, and, black people in general, we tend to come up with a concept that 2 or 3 words may represent, but, if we say those 2 or 3 words, it saves us a paragraph worth of explaining, a paragraph worth of writing, and that kind of stuff. So that's how big chop, TWA, permy, creamy crack, and so forth, it came up. It was our jargon in the chat that was even used by black women who wore relaxed hair and supported the natural hair movement. Again, that old nuance. So, but it was never intended to become weaponized against anyone. We also came up with the I Love Your Hair campaign, where we would just randomly walk around and find a woman that was natural or a little girl. Yes, we were the ones who started that. I may have to do a separate video on all of this. I don't know if that's going to be part 3, part 4. I'm still working on it. But yes, unambiguous and ambiguous black women alike were being uninvited to gatherings. It got personal too. There was one black woman. She's white passing. Okay. She's just one relaxer away from looking like a white woman, or one flat iron session away from looking like a white woman. Okay. She was supposed to be the maid of honor in her sister's wedding, when her sister broke the news to her that she wouldn't even be allowed to become a bridesmaid because she was wearing her hair natural and it would mess up the pictures. Like her sister, these people, they have the same parents, by the way. Her sister, the bride, had like 2C hair. So her sister looked like a whole white woman, even though, her dad was biracial or something like that. And the sister had like maybe 3B hair, right? So, yes, these were the kind of things that were happening. So, we were each other's support system, and we absolutely needed it. Many of us needed this forum. We needed that space. It was a form of a coping mechanism because the women in this particular AOL chat were literally the only sane souls on this planet who could relate to us during those times. It was completely wild. Oh my God. Oh my God. So this AOL chat was a breath of fresh air that was needed to deal with the suffocating effects of mass and, more often than not, willful ignorancy. I can't even call it ignorance. It was just willful ignorancy that we all faced. It became our recharge station for us to refresh, relax, charge up, and get ready to face it again the next day, so to speak. And listen, we're Black women, so of course we disagreed on some things, and each opposing woman was equally passionate about her side of things. You know how we can be. However, the thing was, in that group, we handled it with maturity, and the moderator, particularly the one known as QP, God bless her, she was an absolute sage when it came to squashing any conflict and helping both arguing sides to understand one another and to see the opportunity within the chaos of our opposition and to remain civil towards one another, even to walk away as friends. She was absolutely amazing. And no, QP is not her actual name, but QP are just some of her initials to her name. And I'm just using that because I want to respect her privacy. The hijacking of this movement was extremely traumatic on all of us who saw progress like never before, only for it to be invaded, ripped to shreds, and then colonized by the hijackers.
Of a Lincoln. The road builders didn't deviate an inch from the plan the head man was following. Every hut that lay in the proposed road path was leveled and sealing. Our church, our school, my hut, all went down in a matter of hours. But the worst is yet to be told. Sweet Corrine died from fever and grief, and we buried her in the Olinka way. But Celie, my dear sweet sister, we'll all be coming home soon if we can work something out with the United States immigration, because they don't know whether we're American or African or missionary. Just pray for us, Celie, and watch for me in the sunset.
What's gotten into you? I'm calling you for an hour. Now get my shave and don't keep me waiting.
Where's Celie?
Home fixing a shave, mister.
This is why I'm using a pseudonym for QP, because when she is ready to share her version, it will be because she is willing to do so in her own time and on her own terms. And that goes as well as any of the others who were there at the genesis of this movement. Right now, I am personally at a point where I can share my side of it. And it literally took me years to open that compartment of my brain and to begin to talk about it. The movement hijackers, with their attachment to hate, immaturity, and pure ignorance, along with their collective choice to remain emotionally stunted instead of self-actualizing as adults, are too oblivious to know the damage they cause which can still be seen until this day. And I mean, a lot of us have PTSD behind it. And you know what? Now that I think about it, maybe they do realize it, the damage that they cause. Maybe they do realize it now after all these years of disunity and lost opportunities, and hope that people like me would just leave it alone in the past, it's water under the bridge, and not speak about it. So, you know what? I am glad to be here to disappoint them and to make them nervous and to let them know that we have not forgotten. So, okay, I went off on a bit of a tangent right there, but I had to give a little context to what over 25 years ago in the U.S. was like socially before explaining how black women began to swirl and divest in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, and how it could be traced back to this natural hair movement. Well, before I go in, let me put some disclaimers out here, because I know that this is a sore spot for some people. So, I know that divestment is not new to black women or interracial relationships. The late and great Tina Turner, who I will respectfully call Mrs. Tina Turner Bach because of her husband, Edwin Bach. Bless him. She exhibited both swirling and divestment gracefully during her lifetime. And whether it was Roxy Reynolds, Iman, and David Bowie, may David Bowie rest in peace, Janet Jackson, Halle Berry, and any other black women, Whoopi Goldberg is another one. During that time, swirling and or divestment was usually seen as a kind of one-off situation. And more often than not, it was after they had run the gauntlet with black men first. Think about it. Someone like Ike Turner, okay? So a bit of a disclaimer here. Since similar hijackings have happened to the swirl and divestment movements over the past few years from my observations, I think that it was hijacked too. I know and I respect that this is a very sensitive topic and there are still some open wounds. I'm not here to throw salt in those wounds or to reignite anything. I'm just sharing what happened more than 25 years ago. I'm not on anyone's side except for the truth. So if you're prone to being triggered, I'm just going to ask you to please keep an open mind as I share my side of what I witnessed all those years ago. I also want to make it clear what the definitions of what I am describing as swirling and divestment are. The understanding that I am sharing of what swirling looked like more than 25 years ago, it was something that was at one point called jungle fever. And it's just another name for what is actually defined as exogamy, or when two people from distinctively different ethnic groups date and marry one another. 25 years ago, in that context, in that snapshot of time, it would have meant how a crystalline kerosene or a cerebral would have described it as one opening their options. Back then, this did not necessarily mean excluding black men, but jungle fever, or swirling as it's called nowadays, also meant not being desperately exclusive to black men. In other words, date the rainbow, may the best man of any background win. So that would have been the mindset back then. And also divestment, the definition that I'm operating from as I go and tell you about my experiences, my understanding was simply to center yourself and to consider yourself first and foremost, especially when faced with situations that may limit your capacity to flourish. That instead of coping with those types of situations and dysfunctioning and facing irreparable damage to yourself and your interests, instead of going through that, just remove yourself from those situations. So those situations can, as far as divestment is concerned, can include jobs, toxic neighborhoods, financial investments, and yes, relationships or types of relationships as well. That can mean friendships as well as dating or marriage. So 25 years ago, the word divestment was not a common talking point like it is now. So people were not quite at the point of calling it so or seeing it as a complete divorce from the black community. Like some people view it as nowadays. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. So now that we're clear on what I will mean when I talk about swirling and divestment and how it was done more than 25 years ago, let me dive in. So listen, this AOL chat was a bomb space. Oh my God, it was so refreshing, and we were all so free with each other. We were not our fancy titles and our so-called privileges in that group. We were just all black women who, amongst ourselves, it simply meant that we were just being women. Okay, so as you know, the girlies were in the chat room just being our beautiful and womanly selves. We talked about our day and how people felt the need to approach us and have us to give them what you call it, a dissertation on why we were wearing our hair natural. We encountered that a lot. Yes, this was a thing back then because we stood out. And you know what? We paid for it dearly, especially in the black community where the criticism was the absolute worst. I'm not biting my tongue. Yes, it was. I was there. I experienced it. And I also witnessed it firsthand. And the white passing blacks are those who are light enough to be accepted as a preference or whatever. They paid for it within their respective non-black communities as well as the black community. You know, you get a light-skinned chick that has 4C hair. If she decided to go natural, you know, her man was acting up on her. Or, you know, you got a white passing black woman who got to flat iron her hair every day. If she showed up to work and she didn't flat iron her hair, she was paying for it, right? So we were often dehumanized by the men and the women alike. Yes. Yes. Yes, we were. Black men and black women. Yes, we were. And it was hard. However, most of us were forgiving of their ignorance. That's because the way that we saw it at the time was that they were still mentally enslaved and did not know it. No different than we were upon our collective realization that we were living in the second rendition of the Tion laws. So we were forgiving of their ignorance, but it made it no less exhausting. And yes, we're talking about the black community. And we knew that there would be just some plain old ignorant son of a gun.
What you need to do is go in the back and straighten out those buckshots in the back of your neck. Girl, your hair's so nappy, Wilson couldn't pick it.
A real man wouldn't need any help, Martin.
Well, every man's not built like you, Pam.
Ignorant men and ignorant women alike who delighted in torturing us for being different, for, you know, going down a different path than the norm. We crossed the street, we cut off contact with them, and we talked about them. And later on in the evening, we would decompress in the chat and talk about them like the dogs that they were, because they definitely deserved it, honey. We needed that chat, I'm telling you. But you know what? Beyond that, something, let's call it interesting, was happening to us as well. To our pleasant surprise, we also found ourselves running into allies. And the majority of them were from outside of the black community. Yes, they were. Yes, they were. And the overwhelming majority of them were white people. See, we were expecting back then we were bracing ourselves for, you know, the racism, all the kind of stuff. But believe it or not, we got all of that from black people. It was the white people that were encouraging us. Yes, white women, especially older white women, they were among the main ones that I personally ran into who would compliment my hair and encourage me. And a lot of us, based on what we shared in the chat, we were experiencing similar situations. There goes that nuance again. So in the chat, we shared details about the ups and downs of our dating lives and how our decisions to wear our hair natural was affecting it. Far too often, black women with type 4 hair were facing situations where a black guy wanted to date them, but would ask them if they were going to straighten their hair, if they were going to relax it, use a pressing comb, blah, blah. Also, black women with type 3 hair were facing the same types of black guys that would talk mess about the women with type 4 hair. And how they, the ones with type 3 hair, were the better women than the ones with the type 4 hair. You know, these dudes never put it together that, just because she had type 3 hair, maybe her mom had type 4 hair. So now you're talking bad about women like her mother. And it did not stop with the hair. It went into body types and skin tones. And that's when we really began seeing how the collective of black males played their hand when it came to dating. I can do a video on that one alone, but I'll be brief as much as I can. Okay, so let me tell you something. Imagine that back then, we're talking about over 25 years ago, the popular aesthetic for black women were the Halle Berrys, the Robin Givens, the petite, caramel complected or lighter skinned black woman, the Leela Rashans. Or if we want to do a 2023 comparison, the Halle and the Chloe Baileys. All of these women are beautiful, by the way. That the lighter their skin tone and the more loosely coiled their hair textures, the better. This is what the aesthetic was. This is what black men were going after back then. However, that was in the daytime. At night time, these same dudes were creeping around and cheating on the Halle Berrys and the Robin Givens and the Leela Rashans and so forth with the Kiki Shepherds and the Loretta Devines and the Whoopi Goldbergs and the Alfred Woodards. Or let me just use a 2023 version, like they were cheating with Meg the Stallion and Lupita Nyong'o and Sukihana. All of these women are beautiful as well. I'm just naming them because of their beautiful features that are not Eurotypical. Okay. So, unfortunately, 25 years ago, the women with these phenotypes were considered unattractive, even if, in all actuality, they were drop-dead gorgeous and could grace a Parisian runway. The black community did not accept their brand of beauty, and they were deemed to be not good enough to marry, but they were always, these types of women, for as bad as black males were talking about them especially, and not just black males, some black females. Shout out to Nyla Vibe. She called them unwomen, okay? So I'm going to borrow that term here. Some black unwomen were putting in the work on hating on these types of women too now. So the black community just did not accept their brand of beauty. They were deemed to not be good enough to marry, but they were always walking around with fully black children. Now, how did that happen? They're not good enough to marry, but they're good enough to lay down with and create babies. So a lot of black males, not men, because we differentiate on this channel, a lot of black males, they were playing both sides in the middle. They were tricking a lot of lighter skinned women as well as non-black women into dating them by claiming that they were the better women than the darker skinned black women. Now again, there were white passing black women in this movement along with the mixed, biracial, and light-skinned black women that obviously saw through this bullcrap and were quick to share the schemes with all of us and how it appeared from their side, especially those who were biracial with black fathers. That no, just because someone like Herschel Walker married a white woman and had kids, it was not happily ever after. In fact, more often than not, there were challenges coming from the black male side. So here's yet another card that was dealt, because back then a lot of black males would weaponize dating non-black women as a way to control and domineer over unambiguous black women in the black community, when the reality was that they were just attempting to keep us around so that when things didn't work out on the other side of the fence, outside of the black community, there was a guaranteed group of women in a dating pool that they can scurry back to. Okay? And the fact that black women almost exclusively dated black men was not a coincidence. Black women who got jungle fever back then caught hell. I know this for a fact because I was one of them. I was on some Swirling way back when I was in high school, and I did not care. So long as he was a real man and taller than me, it was fair game. I did not care. However, most black women were not there yet because the black community as a collective would openly bully black women who dated interracially, especially if the man was white. They would say stuff like she was sleeping with the slave master. Sound like, sound like some old bad wench, accusations, that kind of, ugh. Anyway, so for most black women who did date out, it tended to be black men who were not from the U.S., but even that came at a social cost as well, because those men were being seen as lesser black men. Like, it's okay because at least they're black, but they're lesser. And for those of you who are not African American, when I say this was not the prevailing attitude for the vast majority of the community. It was just, and also, these are not my personal perspectives. I'm just sharing the sentiments of a very loud minority of African Americans at the time. So it was like, if you dated an African man or a man from the Caribbean, a black man with an accent, it was seen to some extent like the black women couldn't find an African American man. So she had to go from the dating pool to the dating sewer and just go with any old black man. That was the mentality of some of the people. And, those women to some level caught a little bit of heat too. And as I was saying, a loud minority, not the majority, a loud minority. Because I know that right now we can all agree that Africans nowadays and other diasporan blacks over there running up Tariq Nasheed's blood pressure because the men are outperforming the African American males as a collective. And it won't be long before they're calling Tariq Nasheed and them an African American booty scratcher. So so I digress. We saw all of the normalization of cheating and, baby mamaing of black women, disappearing baby dads, deadbeat dads of black males, and how rampant it was. We saw that. And we also realized that we were being played as pawns against one another. Dark skin against the light skin, against the kinky haired, against the curly haired, educated against the non-educated, curvaceous body against the petite body. The list goes on. So there were women who decided to remain celibate. I remember being passionate about this talking point because I was already a swirler. They called it jungle fever back then, but let's just say swirler from the times. I was already a swirler from the times that it was called jungle fever. So I was out there encouraging women to go with the best man that can, regardless of his background. And y'all, I was being messy about it too. I was. It brings joy to my little heart how I was telling the girlies not to let their love box dry up waiting on a black male when they can have a real man, white, brown, or black. Remember, this is 25 years ago, y'all. I was the hype girl for swirling. I was the one saying, do it. Go ahead and do it. Go out with red hair, green-eyed Brad with a few freckles on his face. Go out with blonde hair, blue-eyed Matt. Go out with Pablo. I sure did. I was messy about it too, honey. I was rubbing it in their face. Why are you sitting over there alone? Do you think that dude that hadn't called you back, do you think he's alone, or do you think he's swimming? If you know what I mean. So why should she be waiting on that? And I told him if the black male wasn't calling him back, go out with another one. I was telling him to rotate date back then. Because, see, my biggest argument was, why put your ovaries on ice? All because you can't find a good black man to date you. Dude wasn't about to let his scrotum run dry. So why should she put her life on hold? Go with a man of any background who is good to you, treats you well, and will honor you. Girl, I was on some screw these no good Negroes way back when. These males were doing things like promising to marry the one who stuck around after he dibbled and dabbled. Danae Jackson, Derek Jackson, I was saying don't be that chick, because I sure wasn't that chick. To me, if he's bipedal and is taller than me and has a deep enough voice, then it's fair game, along with other considerations. He got to have some goals and aspirations and, some money, you know what I mean? But it was fair game. I did not limit myself, and I was encouraging these ladies to, do the same. Screw them and do you. And look, these women were coming in saying that they were unsure about dating non-black men because they didn't know what to do. And we, especially me, we were in the chat saying, girl, go for it. See, what black women needed to swirl was to know that the girlies had their backs. And I was one of them ones, girl, I was the cheerleader. I had my pom-poms. Do it. Go out with them. Forget what they have to say. Girl, I sure was. So, and I was in the group cheering them on. Trust me. It had less to do with the act of swirling, per se, and more to do with finally seeing a beautiful black woman who's well deserving of it, being adored, respected, and treasured, regardless of her features, textures, etc., etc. And I told you I was that messy one, y'all. I would hype it up and be like, when's the last time a black male brought you some flowers? When's the last time he called you? Because, see, that was another thing back then, too. Black males will go out on a date with a black woman, and, you know, maybe they go to a movie, they go to dinner, which was cheap back then, by the way. We're talking about 25 years ago. So that was an easy date, but they would, you know, they wanted you to give it up. So a lot of black women didn't date because of that. They didn't want to go through that. Or they dealt with the booty call man, the one that only want to call you at 1 o'clock in the morning and, oh, what you doing? That kind of stuff. And even if she let him come over, you know, afterwards she wouldn't hear from him for days and weeks, if not longer. See, me, I'm saying to rotate date way back when. I was ahead of my time, honey. And besides, I learned to rotate date from my own half-brother. Me, personally, I didn't do the intimacy thing, but I did rotate date. So it's black males' fault that I ran the same game on them and then taught other black women to do it too. I have no remorse, by the way. So I was also one of the main voices giving advice because we were dealing with black women who had never conceived of dating interracially. And now here they are. Black men ain't calling them back, ain't looking at them. But Brad and Jose is saying, hey, what's up? Sending them flowers and birthday presents. So they didn't know what to do. They did not know what to expect. And then also juggling with the social consequences that they may have to face if they decide to go through with it. So I believe the fact that interracial dating, although growing, was still uncommon as recently as 2010, and those conditions may have very well led to why CK put out her book about swirling a while back. I'm not sure, and don't quote me on it, but it was a thing even in 2010. So you can only imagine how inconceivable it was in the late 90s, especially for a black woman from down south. You know, black women were saying oh, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to expect. So I was there along with the others, just encouraging them to be themselves. I was boosting their confidence, letting them know that it was going to be all right. Because, see, I was already there. Baby, I've been swirling, whatever. So I was saying stuff like, he's a man. He just happens to be non-black, but he's still a man regardless. I was giving advice on cultural considerations because these women were nervous. And then, like I said before, there were real social consequences at the time of their choice to date out. So I was there along with others, encouraging them to take that plunge. And y'all, a lot of the ladies were having success with non-black men. And it was even leading to marriages and family creation with two-parent homes. And their connection with the non-black men were rooted in their genuine love from one another's character and personality. It wasn't about, a bunch of body parts, a bunch of features, what type of hair you have, what color is your skin tone, how big is your nose or slender, what kind of figure you have, and also it wasn't what are you bringing to the table isms, and that was in the forum. I personally, in real life, knew two women, mothers. Both of them were mothers to 4 fully black children each, okay? And a white man married each of them. Each of them were married by a white man, right? And they bought them new cars. built brand new houses, all that kind of stuff, and treated them and the children very well. In addition to that, I started seeing minivan driving soccer moms with afros who were housewives. You know, they were showing up with trays of cookies and cupcakes, and they had rocks on their fingers, honey, for wedding rings, with white men taking care of them from head to toe, their white husbands. And you know who else saw it? The permies. Yes, they did. They started taking note. Now, to us in the AOL chat, a permie was just simply someone who was brainwashed into using the relaxer. They were like a robot when it came to the relaxer. This did not mean necessarily that because she was a permie, she was a bad person, per se. But listen, the permie, you cannot come to her about going natural, because at that point in time, she was not trying to hear it. And at some point, a lot of us were permies. So, but listen, the permies began to put two and two together and realizing that they would be accepted by a Brad or a Jose or whoever who will put a rock on their finger, honor them as women, make them wives, pay for everything from roof to basement, and she can finally relax and focus on the things that were interesting to her, that she did not need to go through costly hairstyling sessions at her own expense just to impress a black male that wasn't going to be there for her, that she did not have to wait around for a phone call at 1 a.m. for some Dusty to come spend the night, leaving her with nothing but a wet booty, or leaving her pregnant and then disappearing. See, the permies began to switch teams, and more of them became natural. And you know what? When black males were seeing this, they started talking to the permies, and black men were trying to get the permies to relax their hair after they switched sides, you know. And, you know, the former permies were saying things like, are you going to pay for it? Of course he was going to say no. And she'd be like, okay, and leave him alone. And then he would threaten not to date her or tell her that ain't no black man going to want her. You know how it goes. But you know what? Around that time, she also, you know, the typical permie that switched teams also said okay to that too. You see, once that began to happen, and these males back then, more than 25 years ago, began to realize that they could not run that game on black women anymore. He couldn't go to the Halle Berrys and the Lila Rashans and tell them that they were too skinny, and that when they spoke up for themselves because he done did some nonsense, that they were beginning to act more like black women, meaning darker skin, type 4 hair black women. You know, the masculines. So they claim that we are, right? When they realized that they were also losing access to the same quote unquote masculine black women, you know, the darker, unambiguous black woman with type 4 hair, and worse, that there were non-black men who were marrying them, treating them like ladies, and actually treating them like women and wives. That, y'all, that's when the black male switched up and started worshiping dark-skinned, natural hair black women. And they even went so far as to start attacking the very preferences that they used to worship. They were going over there, oh, your skin is too light. Oh, you ain't thick enough in the hips. Your hair texture is too loose. They switched it up. And see, none of these black males knew about the AOL group and did not realize that we understood their game from all angles. And we would often laugh about the irony of it all. I mean, my goodness, I was there to witness it, and I still can't believe it. How they switched up. They went from Martin Lawrence, BDB, to Pam. You know, they went from that, and these mofos, okay, they went from worshiping light skin, loose curly hair, okay, and threatening us by saying, oh, I'll just get a white woman, okay. They went from that to talking about how they want the Hershey chocolate complexion having woman, The very woman that they used to make fun of just because she was darker skinned. It did not matter if her skin was smooth like velvet and that her facial features resembled ancient Egyptian goddesses. So long as she was dark, they condemned her to being ugly. You see, and overnight, this same woman that they would condemn to the realm of ugliness despite her features, overnight they made her the beauty queen. They made her the mascot. Shout out to my dark skinned ladies. You already beautiful queens. I'm just describing what it was like to see the transition, okay? Because part of the fuel in the fire of the natural hair movement, beyond fighting against the Tignon laws and cancer-causing chemicals, was the reality that many of us had relatives who were deemed to be quote-unquote unattractive because of the darkness of their skin. As a caramel complexion with yellow undertones, my untanned body is as light as a brown paper bag. I literally would have dudes approach me back then, put their arm next to mine, and say that we would make a pretty baby together. In other words, I'm light enough for them to want to make a baby with me. As if that was supposed to be a compliment. Child, listen. But what they were also doing at the same time was making it seem as if I were the same, had chocolate toned skin, that I would have been ugly just automatically. That was some bullcrap that I never stood for. I have dark-skinned relatives, and all the women in my family are beautiful, so I was never into that nonsense about colorism or any other isms. So when I saw the black males literally shift from worshiping a Halle Berry-looking woman as a collective to now they're worshiping Lettucey, India.Arie, and for a while they worshipped Ari Lennox and Tiana Taylor until they reignited futurism. Oh yeah. See the games that they be playing? You can't make this stuff up. I was there when it happened. Okay? These dudes were a reason why, if we fast forward some years, Don Imus referred to the Rutgers women's basketball team as a bunch of nappy-headed hoes. Don Imus actually thought it was okay to say that because he thought he was just, being down with the brothers. Al Roker, somebody who was probably picked on by other black males when he was younger, for being different, for being overweight, for being smart, and basically being a nerd about the weather, publicly stood up and basically said, "Not on my watch." Child, so you can't tell me about these folks. It's about using black women's resources and using our heads collectively as their footstools. So when the inexpensive brown Pantene bottle shampoo and conditioner with some coconut oil and hair tie, average Keisha of the black community, the average black woman, started getting married out to white men, when she was embraced as is in different communities and adored for who she was, as she was, and had white people as her ally, also supporting her and encouraging her, even giving her advice. That's when the hood Negroes shifted from worshiping their preferences and weaponizing them against us to now pretending that all of a sudden that dark-skinned, 4C hair-having black women were the best things since sliced bread. Y'all, I'm going to stop it here because I have so much more to say, and this video is already long enough. So please make sure that you like this video, hit the subscribe button so that you'll know whenever I upload the next part to this series about the natural hair movement, our accomplishments, some of which can still be seen till this day, and how it was hijacked. So in part 3, I want to go into more detail about those accomplishments and the strategies behind it. I think it's important for y'all to know that, how we intended for it to appear even today, and what happened and why we're kind of seeing stuff like the disunity between black people based on skin tone, hair textures, and features. So make sure you stay tuned. I'm going to leave off here and make sure you take care until next time, okay?